And here we are. Welcome, one and all, to the Minds of the Up. We have a new challenger. Welcome, Rich.
Oh, well,
Hey, what's going on?
Hey,
Give me a minute to
take your
turn on my
time.
camera.
yep.
What's going on?
Oh, just the usual thing on Wednesday.
Yep.
Figured we talk about Department of Education.
What Department of Education?
Exactly my point.
Yeah, that's something. They
Yep.
also released the JFK files today, I think.
Yeah, I don't even need fingers to count how many people that actually cared about that Reddit.
Yeah.
I think it was the day the Martin Luther King thing dropped. People were like, "Oh, they posted the Martin Luther King." Unless Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton are in there as informants, I do not care.
Right.
What are they going to tell me that I didn't already know? Yeah, the government wasn't really fond of civil rights. You say.
Come full circle.
Wow. This is new information that nobody knew about for the last 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 to 90 to 100 years.
I'm shocked retroactively.
Makes you wonder why they even bothered to classify a lot of that still.
I'm saying while they're sitting there dropping all this stuff, where them Epstein files at? Where's your buddy of
Yeah.
13 years?
Oh, come on, Lethy. You know that Trump released those already.
Oh. So redacted, they refract sunlight.
They're so redacted you could scan them like a barcode.
The hypocrisy. Come on. I do not have the patience for that. People act like this is big news. I'm like, unless with JFK there was like literally magic wizard bullets, I really do not care. I don't think they found anything interesting in any of that so far, but it's like 7,000 pages. Who's reading that?
Oh, here in Dallas, people read it. Kind of a pastime here. JFK conspiracy theories.
Gather around the fire while we read these.
7,000 pages. Who's reading that? Hell, Twitchbowl, we can hardly get people to read half a page in an article.
Let alone a paragraph if you type it.
And yet they still have very strong opinions on that thing they heard of 5 minutes ago.
Right.
They have strong opinions on the paragraph you typed out that they didn't read properly, and you have to inform them of what you said in the last post.
Yeah. Yep.
Everybody's an epiphanal expert.
I love it. Hey, what's good, Zephyr? Thank you for subscribing. Zephyr streaking. Well, as Rich gets his camera up and going, welcome one and all to the Minds of the Ecclesia. I am your host, Lethy Water Kai, and with me I have two awesome guests that I rarely ever can get in one place at one time, let alone by themselves. So I'm gonna go ahead and let them get a introduction as if they need one, starting with Desperado.
I'm DesperadoSensei. That's pretty much all you need to know.
Epic. And with us today also, Rich.
Hey, I call Rich. I'm a debate coach out of Texas. I do panels sometimes, doing a few more. Just did Enemy Charlie yesterday, which was a new one for me.
Never heard of that one.
Yeah, I kind of knew who she was actually, but hadn't really talk to her much prior to yesterday. But there were 16 people on that panel.
That's what that was?
Yeah, it's the one where hold on, let me turn my camera. It's the it's one of those where it starts with 16 and then they drop 2 and then they drop 2 and so on until it's down to until they get it down to
It's an
1.
elimination panel.
It's an elimination panel.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
I thought Gibbs was doing hippy dippy, so I was like, what is this?
Yeah, it was a pretty unbalanced panel though because it was almost all liberals, but still it was pretty good.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and start off with the fun. Trump set to sign executive order shuttering the education department. The president campaigned extensively on a promise to dismantle the department and appointed an education secretary keen to carry out the task. President Donald Trump is expected to sign an executive order Thursday to close the education department, fulfilling a years-long pledge to dismantle the federal agency, the White House confirmed. Trump will hold an event at the White House to sign the order directing Education Secretary Linda McMahon to take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure the Department of Education and return education authority to the states. States' rights, gotta love it. While continuing to ensure the effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits on which Americans rely. How do we feel about this? What should be done with the Department of Education? Just in general, tell me how to feel.
Scared.
Whoever wants to start this off, please, Despy.
But I would say the main thing to look out for is this is probably going to affect like the free school lunch programs, which means that you're going to have a lot of kids going hungry. So a lot of schools federally get subsidized by the federal government for free school lunch programs. When they shutter this like that, that puts a lot of kids at risk for not having a meal during the day. And a lot of times these kids don't have breakfast. Sometimes they don't even have supper at night. The only meal they get is at school. So we're going to see a lot of really hungry kids, and you're also going to see grades dip because if you look at different. Hold on just a second. My kids are being a little loud. You're going to see scores and everything dip inside schools if a large portion of those students are not able to get adequate like food during the day. That's just one part. I'm pretty sure Rich can think of a bunch of other stuff as well too. But
oh yeah, there's a ton of them, but just to stay on the school lunch thing, like every school I've been in that has breakfast and lunch, and we definitely depended on that funding for that. I just don't know. I mean, whether or not this actually ends up having that effect on school lunches is really going to depend on what the courts do. I'm sure that this. Wherever this funding goes, like once the Department of Education is gone, wherever it like transfers to like commerce or something, I don't know who would take it, but once that happens, then it's going to be up to. It might even be up to NGOs to sue. I mean, I'm sure a lot of blue states will sue, but there are a lot of red states that won't sue, and so I don't know how you like fight for the rights of those kids in those states. Maybe municipalities can, something like that. But it's going to be a mess. I have no idea what to expect. But also, like a lot of, student loan funding goes through there. I spent every year. There's a good chunk of the year that I spend on getting kids access to education resources, like Pell Grants and we have something called the Texas Equalization Fund here, and
Yep.
we have just tons of different ways of making sure that once the hard part of getting a kid into college isn't getting them in; it's paying for it. So
Yep.
I'll get a straight A kid, get him into a really good school, but then I have to figure out what to do to get that stuff paid for. And now it's not clear how you do that. How the paperwork would change if there is paperwork changing. Like a lot of people don't realize that a lot of this federal funding depends on discoverability, right? So if you're not, if the Department of Education isn't out there making sure that everyone is aware of these resources, then the resources will be technically offered, but nobody's applying for it because no one is aware that it exists. And so technically you're not breaking the rules, right? The courts can't say that you're disobeying Congress because you are making these funds available. It's just nobody applied for it because nobody apparently cares about money anymore. But it's really because the resources that we would normally use to discover these resources suddenly don't work anymore.
Yeah.
The links
What I
don't work.
what I would say is that originally, before the Department of Education was created, it was under the Department of Agriculture. So likely, if what is it, the states don't necessarily have their own like DOE, they'd probably go back under the Department of Agriculture.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I'm old enough to where I still remember, people doing ag stuff every year at my school.
Yep. Yep.
So, how would the states, like in general, be able to fill in the gaps? Like, do we think the states will be able to all of a sudden take over all of these essential functions that the government is expecting that this executive order is going to reach?
I think it depends on what they do. Like, there's talk of them doing a lot of block grants. And of course, then it's going to be okay. If you're a red state, those block grants are going to get stolen by the states to pay for other stuff like tax cuts or something. But then the blue states might actually use those block grants to do the thing the Department of Education was doing. In which case, okay, some of that funding will still be used for what it was being used for, but it's going to be way less efficient because now you've got up to 50 states trying to create their own programs. You guys might remember Obamacare when the Supreme Court came down with its decision that said each state gets to choose. And as a result, a bunch of states sort of pulled out. And then they had to create their own exchanges within the states. And the states that did that had growing pains for good 3 to 5 years trying to figure out how to make those exchanges work. Whereas the ones that just stayed in the federal system, there was one initial growing pain year at the federal level, and then everything was fine. I think it's going to be like that here, but worse, because I think there's going to be a lot of controversy as to how those block grants get spent, and it won't be enough to cover everything the DOA currently covers.
Yeah. The other thing to take a look at is that when we actually look at like each state as if we look at each state as its individual like economy, we have about like 7 states that are actually doing very well, like very profitable. We've got like another 13 or 14 states that are like right above the red, and then pretty much everything else underneath that is like in the red. So if we're just giving like these block grants directly to the states for education and whatnot, a lot of that money's either going to go to that red or, like Rich was saying, basically go to do tax cuts.
Yeah,
and stuff. Like as an example, with when Sam Brownback was in Kansas, he basically gutted the entire Department of Transportation. So it was so bad that there were like bridges that I remember like driving across in like rural parts of Kansas where they literally had roadblocks saying that you can't use this bridge because it was no longer safe and they had nobody to actually go and like check on it. Do you know how hard it is to go on a road that's normally a 15-minute drive and make like a 45-minute detour to go around to go to a location just because like the Department of Transportation was completely underfunded? Now, if they get that block grant, then they could find a loophole, let's just say, to say that fixing this bridge is a way to make sure the kids can adequately get to school. And then they can argue that this is like a way to use that block grant to not actually fund education, but to actually fund the roads.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the major issues.
So, well, they'll put a lot of it to private schools or charter schools.
Or private construction companies.
So we're currently complaining that Americans aren't adequately capable educationally to take over certain jobs in America to the point where we need to farm out these things to H-1Bs. And this is what's been said by multiple people in government at this point, to which Americans are just like, well, we want Americans to have these jobs. This seems like it's going to make it worse in the future. We already have low reading scores and math issues going on in a lot of states. So do we see this like completely crippling certain states in educational fields?
Um. Well, I personally, what I would say is the HB1 visas is more of a of when you're looking at employment, we have people that can do the job, like depending on what job it is. It's just that they have labor protections, like H1B visa holders don't have the same labor protections that like American citizens do, and that's part of the reason why a lot of companies want to exploit them. So it's not necessarily that like all the H1Bs are taking our jobs, and a lot of people aren't smart enough to do it. It's just that the people that are smart enough to do it um, are not going to be willing to do it for 20 extra hours of overtime that's not paid.
Yeah, that's what saved Twitter when Elon took over. A bunch of people, after he fired a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch more people left. But the people who couldn't leave were the H1B visa holders, because if they were to leave, then they would also lose their visa. So he was able to do that, and it didn't really matter how bad working conditions got over there because they couldn't leave.
Yeah, the way that the H-1B visas are set up are like almost contractually is almost like an indentured servitude. What is it? Like style of setup. So like in order for them to change jobs, they have to get permission from their employer to change jobs. Now, if you can already, and if the employer has a problem with you working your job, that employer can pull that visa out from under you and you can lose your job. So when we're looking at this here, you basically have somebody that controls when and how you work. And if you don't work the way they want you to, they can get rid of you. And if they don't want you to go to another company, then they don't have to send you. And you're basically stuck.
Yep.
And getting green card holder status in the United States is an extremely long and grueling process. So you may be working at that job for 8 to 10 years just to get the ability to be able to apply for a green card.
So Zephyr saying as an H-1B holder is not indentured servitude. So he has some contention to that particular lighting on the issue, but I'm sure he'll fill us in along the way.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the job sector that you're in. Like for instance, those Twitter workers, like they were kind of, there was a perfect storm that happened there, because he was firing people at a time when a bunch of other people were being let go at a bunch of other companies, such that it's true that you could, if you could find another company to sponsor you, you could, as an H-1B visa holder, like switch companies. But this was at a time when all of a sudden there were a ton of workers like flooding the market. And so, especially at that time, corporations also can collude and say, don't sponsor any of my H-1B people and I won't sponsor yours, right? So we don't pilfer from each other. And that's another way in which you get closer and closer to what Despy's talking about when he says indentured servitude. Like, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not that much. And it really depends on the job sector that you're talking about at any given time.
And I use the term indentured servitude not to denote the way that like it worked like in the past, but what I'm trying to get at here is that you're basically at the whim of your employer. Yeah. Not all people that had indentured servants were bad people, okay?
So, staring down the barrel of the Department of Education being shuttered, what should have been done instead? Like, what kind of
Like,
reforms could have
in
been
what
made
way?
to the Department of Education to where it could have been seen as viable? Because, like, pretty much the way I see it, they're probably going to do what they're doing here, say the schools are underperforming, continue to
Hmm.
privatize everything, and say it's just not functioning as it should be anyway. So break it until it's broken, and then say it's broken and we're going to replace it.
Yeah. So what should have happened instead is you don't break it, right?
Yeah.
Like you just don't do it at all. Like I think the Department of Education. I think if you look at public polling, like the Department of Education's pretty popular. Like people still to this day will deny that Trump wants to do this, even though he's already done it. Like at this point, it's a done deal, and people
Yeah.
are still saying that, oh no, that's an exaggeration or whatever. That's Project 2025 talk, right? Like that was a hoax. Um, yeah,
TDS.
yeah.
TDS.
Yeah. Yeah. TDS. It's all TDS. Even once it's already done, it seems like the only thing that people notice is when they themselves are affected by it personally. And we all will be affected by this personally. It's just people don't realize it. They won't realize it probably until it comes time to start paying for college. If you've got a kid who's about to be a freshman in college, you're going to notice that it might be a little bit more difficult to get some of those student loans or some of those grants.
Yeah.
Technically, it's still up to the courts. The courts might say you can't block that stuff. You still have to give it out somehow. But I still think the numbers are going to drop precipitously.
I'll be honest. I think he nuked in the wrong direction.
Which direction should he have nuked?
Should have nuked the states and the school boards.
Because I'm assuming you guys, had some issues with the Department of Education where there were things that
Hmm.
probably weren't
Yeah.
great about it. And I'm wondering, like, what things specifically can you point out that the Department of Education should have been working on?
Every Student Succeeds Act should have been repealed like 5 minutes after it was signed.
Yeah, it's the standardized testing, and that don't get me wrong. Like I actually am a fan of standardized testing as a concept, but the way that it works out, the way that the Department of Education has been implementing it, really for a couple of decades now, is that these are minimum competency tests, and they're also way too high stakes. So if we should be measuring these things because we need to know when we're succeeding and when we're not, and doing it in a way that's standardized is the only way to make sure that you have data that holds people accountable at least to some extent. But none of those consequences ought to redound to the student. It shouldn't be that the student cannot move forward or the student cannot, like, there shouldn't be any punishment for the student as a result of low test scores, right? This should all be about holding teachers accountable. And that's not the way the system is set up right now.
Yeah. The other thing is that with the way the funding and the standardized tests work with Every Student Succeeds, is that the states themselves can choose to change the standardized test that they're using, and they can change the standardized test right now so that their students, like the students in Mississippi, are getting an easier test than the students in let's say Michigan, and they're saying, "Hey, look, our kids got really good scores, so we should get all the maximum funding we should possibly be able to get."
Which means the
Because
tests are not standardized. Like they're
exactly
de-standardized.
right,
Yeah.
they're standardized at the state level instead of being at a federal level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
Tiberius
agree.
says in the chat that it needs to write a national curriculum or it should be nuked.
Yeah, well, I would say it should write a national curriculum. Or at least have it where, like, yeah, this was like my idea. Let's say you want like a particular like math textbook, okay? And there are like 5 math textbooks competing. The government basically says, let's say there's 20 math books competing, and the government decides like these 5 are the best to use, and then gives the states the option to choose from the 5 textbooks that the federal government has decided. I think that is a better model than just kind of like the states just deciding which math textbook they're going to go with without having like a federal list of approved textbooks.
Yeah, and what a lot of states don't like, especially low-performing states don't like, is having a standardized test that's the same sort of nationally. So
Yep.
you can have like a limited choice of textbooks. That's fine. You can have standards that are set by the federal government, but the curriculum is going to follow the test. So once
Hmm.
teachers realize like what the tests expect, they're going to teach to the test. And a lot of people complain about teaching to the test, but teaching to the test can be a problem. But it's really a problem when you have a bad test. When you're
Yeah.
teaching to the AP Lit test, you get pretty good curriculum. When you're
Right.
teaching to, even if you're teaching the SAT, you can get good curriculum out of that. But when you're teaching to the STAR test in Texas, for instance, it's terrible. It's terrible.
Yep.
And what ends up happening is your AP scores go down because you're testing to some other standard that's like way below that standard. So I don't necessarily know we need to have a federal curriculum. I think if we had federal testing standards, then everyone would tailor their curriculum to that. Like, say that'd be fine. But I don't object to a federal curriculum either.
Yeah. I, I would say that it would be a plus to have
You
it.
probably don't want Texas deciding what is science and what isn't.
No. No.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I was looking at. Like, they were complaining about things like CRT, when really it's just teaching more aspects of history. And this allowed for them to want to remove more things from the curriculum and teach selective things here and there. And I think that's definitely going to be problematic when it comes down to the states choosing what the curriculum's going to be going forward.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, you can't be teaching about like the what is it, the Tulsa massacre, and then have people think that that both sides had their issues. Because Tulsa massacre really isn't even taught in high school. I don't think it.
Mhm.
I don't remember ever learning about it in high school. Did you ever teach about it, Rich, or knew it as
No,
part of the
well,
curriculum?
so in speech and debate we do now,
Yeah.
but we didn't before. Uh, The Watchmen came out.
Yeah.
The TV show. Like they're the ones who brought it into the public consciousness, and it started winding up in debate cases and stuff like that after that. But that wasn't
Hmm.
because of anything public teaching was doing. It was because of Hollywood. Um, yeah,
Yep.
doing our job for us. Hollywood often has to make up for the shortfalls of education in America.
Yep.
You sometimes get a better education from movies and TV shows. As inaccurate as all of those things can be,
Yep.
it still makes you aware of it, right? In a way that your class might not.
It gives you a different like a lens to view, like a different medium to learn through,
Mm-hmm.
like, and even if it's not 100% accurate, it makes it makes what you read in the textbook seem to come alive a little bit better, and you can actually like you can feel what's going on instead of having to like try to construct it from not being able to like visually see it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, my students, like if they watch something that has a historical plot line or whatever, they'll go straight to Wikipedia after that. So
Yeah.
they'll go, oh, that it didn't really happen the way this anime said, or whatever.
Right.
But
Right.
it starts a conversation, and I think that's always good.
Hmm.
And we don't start enough conversation. In fact, now if you start a conversation in class, fortunately, like I'm immune from this because I'm not in the public schools anymore, and even when I was, there was no standardized testing around speech and debate, so I had a lot more freedom. But if you're teaching a standard class like English or history or even math and science, then starting a conversation like that can be considered a waste of time because that 30 minutes that you spent on that was something that you could have spent teaching to the test. And you're considered, your kids might have a lower test score as a result of you putting stuff in the
Yeah.
curriculum that's not strictly to do with the test.
Right.
Especially with AP Lit, that was, I mean, not AP Lit, especially with history classes, that really frustrated me because so many like questions that the kids want to ask that you can't really go into because you've got that next unit that you need to teach.
Right. You need those dates and names and
Mm-hmm.
places.
Yep.
And if you don't have those dates and names and places for that, history class, you're not going to pass that test. So
That's right.
we can't talk about the greater context of what's inside there.
Now, sometimes you can get lucky, right? You can figure out a way to teach the context, and the context makes the dates and names more relevant, and so they actually remember things better. So you get those opportunities sometimes, but a lot of times you don't, and it's a really missed opportunity then.
Yep.
Beat me to it before I could even ask, because I was going to think maybe in some cases the context would definitely put things in a better light to help people understand what the climate was at the time, how things were functioning. Like, that makes sense. But it seems unfortunate that there's not enough room in the curriculum for that to happen. And it seems like the system itself is recalcitrant to it.
Yeah, it is, because sometimes it's not even politics directly that does it. It's just it's politics on the level of that's what's motivating the parents to complain. But the people then who are making the decision, they're just trying to keep the parents happy. Like, for them, it's not even a political decision. It's just that they know the parents will shut up if you stop talking about X, Y, or Z.
Yep.
And I think that has a lot to do with it, because there's a lot of administrators that really don't give a shit about the political side of this, and they're kind of embarrassed even to tell you that you can't say something or do something. Again, like, I felt that in English and history. I've never felt that in speech and debate. For whatever reason, that kind of pressure isn't put on us.
Did you see that whole bit recently in the news about the teacher? It was like third? She's not a third. What was it? It was
Every student belongs.
yeah. What is it? Everyone like, we accept everyone here, or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little everyone is accepted here, and everyone is welcome here. I think it was everyone.
Like, welcome. It is everyone's welcome here, and it was arms of different skin tones.
Right, with little hearts inside the hands and whatnot. And the everyone was like a multicolored thing, but it wasn't necessarily like an LGBT, like,
it was
color.
Pastels. It wasn't the totally
and
colors in that,
apparently somebody had complained to an administrator that not everybody was welcome.
Right.
So the admin was immediately like, all right, take that down.
Which one of those arms was the terrorist arm? How dare you welcome terrorists into our
right.
Yeah. Crazy stuff.
Is it a Texas terrorist or a rest of the United States?
A J6 terrorist is perfectly fine.
No, I just wonder if it was a terrorist or a tourist.
Oh yeah.
Watch out for those terrorists.
Those tourists always coming through the state.
So, how do you think this will affect sex education?
Well, honestly, it's not going to. I honestly think it's not going to affect it as much. There's going to be places that are going to be affected a lot worse, and that's probably going to be more in like poorer states. But it's not going to be like this rampant major issue. I don't think is going to happen.
I think conservatives kind of see it as a plus if teenage pregnancy rates go up.
Yeah,
because they see it as an alternative to immigration. Strangely enough, so like they are starting to see that we're not having enough babies, and the obvious solution to that, at least in the short to medium term, is immigration. But since they don't like that as a solution, then they feel like they have to get us to have kids like any kind of way they can, and they see a sex education class as a way of having fewer white babies.
Yeah.
As it's on record from Elon saying that a less educated populace that's more religious is more conducive to birth rates. That kind of seems like a fear that I have in this, and that you're going to have a busted education system producing more children to end up in a busted education system that are going to have bad outcomes.
Well, all I'm going to say is that the states that are like wanting to push for abstinence only when it comes to sex education are already pushing like topics in that way inside the schools there. they're only teaching like the bare minimum. So it's not like there's going to be like this massive change in how like the sex education is going to be structured in those particular schools, those counties, those districts, those states. If you want to go up like that far, I'm just saying that all you're going to see is you're going to see them maybe reduce stuff that they had already like reduced down. Like they're doing homeopathy, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Is they already took what they were supposed to do and they diluted that shit down. All they're doing is diluting it down even more from the dilution that they had beforehand, which means that like there's it's not like they're going to be losing much.
Mm. Yeah, I think it was already woefully inadequate to begin with. So I'm like worried about most of the education standards across the board, but this particular subject I think is going to lead to some really crazy outcomes because when you're already messing with the programs, you're messing with the federal assistance in general, then this issue comes up. I think it's going to be crazy.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this stuff is also at a state level. So if we're looking at like the sex education curriculum, it's going to be at the state level as it is. It's just that like the federal government would have a little bit of oversight as to like how it's being implemented. And now that oversight's just going to be going away. But like the states themselves have have already decided how they're going to be doing that. So I mean, it's kind of like what is it? You no longer have the manager that comes in every 3 weeks to check your work for like 15 minutes and leave.
How long do you think, like, if things go according to plan, how long do you think before we start seeing some serious problems going on?
Honestly, what I think is going to happen is that with a lot of like the public schools and whatnot, because they're throwing everything back to the states and the standardized tests themselves are going to be like at a state level. You're going to have states that are going to be using the standardized test or their standardized test as a means of attracting people to move to their state. But what you're going to have is you're going to have Michigan or Minnesota as an example having like an actually like really good standardized test, and the scores on those standardized tests like look really good. But you're going to have like a standardized test in like let's just say like Alabama, in which they're like distinguish between these three colors, red, yellow, and blue. And it's like, look, Jimmy did very well on his standardized test. All of our kids do well on our standardized test. You should come move to Alabama. And like, you don't necessarily get to see the standardized test the kids are taking. Also, the crayons half eaten. So
that was the other expectation. Here we go.
Right.
Those kids are going to be hungry.
Yeah. No. So I would say that what you're going to see is you would probably see an actual like a retraction of the or like a retraction in the number of people that are going to be attending public universities at the same time too. So where you would have a lot more people that would like attend like let's just say the University of Mississippi. You may see a lot of in-state people not be able to attend the University of Mississippi because they pass the standardized test, but they can't pass the entrance exam. Okay. Because unless you have an SAT score or an ACT score, like universities have entrance exams, and this universities themselves are not going to take and lower the standards of their entrance exams for people to get into that university.
So, wow, I'm thinking on that. We would probably have a lower number of college graduates in the future compared to what we have now.
Most definitely. Especially with what is it? The Department of Education oversees like the financial, like FAFSA, the financial aid, and what is it like services? So that means that if they don't cut Pell Grants and they keep Pell Grants, that'll be a good thing. But likely they're probably going to cut those too, and then make it so that it's a block that the states individually get. I do not know how they're going to do that or how the states are going to work with that, because FAFSA is something you have to sign up for in like the beginning of the school year. They have a deadline date that you need to that is like the start date, and whoever gets there first basically gets like the max amount of money. If you are late to signing up for FAFSA, you can get a reduced amount of money to go to university. So everybody's like signing up like in the first couple weeks, like all but crashing the FAFSA website, trying to make sure that they're not late to the party to get the financial aid they need to go to university.
So
So if so what I was just going to say is that if this is now taken and given to the states as like just a block of money, then the states can repurpose that money, and that means that the individual students that are looking to get the financial aid for like tuition and books, which is what FAFSA usually covers, they're going to be getting like less money to go to a university that's going to be charging them more, because those universities are building stadiums and sports complex for like to get alumni people's children to go to their school.
that's pretty much what it's going to be. You're going to see a lot more legacy in these schools and a lot fewer people getting education. So Senator Pat Murray of Washington said that the de facto head of the Department of Government Efficiency is robbing our students and families of critical funding. And when it comes down to the funding that's already at hand, would some of these loans end up going to private entities where they were previously government?
You mean like a Ford loan or a Perkins loan?
Pretty much.
Can't you get like a Ford loan or a Perkins loan at a private university?
I would think so.
Like a federally backed?
Yeah, I think the confusion is the federal government doesn't hold any of these loans. They've been private for a long time.
Yeah.
It's just that the federal government guarantees the loans.
Ah,
And I don't see how they can stop guaranteeing those loans. Like, that's congressionally authorized stuff. That's statutory. But I wouldn't be shocked to find that they was trying some way around that.
Yeah.
well, yeah, with this being an
Certainly they're going to
executive order.
cancel. Certainly they're canceling every bit of forgiveness that was passed in the last 4 years. So, or implemented in the last 4 years. So they're going to try to claw as much of that back as they can.
IDR and what is it? Saves. What is it? What's the other one? It's was it IBR? There's IDR, and then there's one other one that's like there's income driven repayment, and then
Mhm.
there's another one that's deals with like I think it has to do with if you're on disability and the amount like you have to pay back or something like that. Like there's a special one.
There's so many different ways in
Yeah.
which they were trying to do. One of my favorites was the cap on how much your monthly payment can be. So Obama took that down. There wasn't a cap before, and then Obama created the cap, and it was 10% of your discretionary income. And then Biden took that to 5% of your discretionary income. And I can easily see Trump just removing that cap entirely. So your $50 a month payment may turn into $800 a month, something.
Yep. And we're going to see a lot of what is it? People hurting when that happens. Like you're going to see, like I don't want to say it's going to be mass hysteria, but it's going to be there's going to be a lot more homeless people. There's going to be a lot more people that are going to be in dire straits, like barely able to eke out a living or scrape out a living because of it.
So,
and there are other countries that would like to take our place as the place that people want to go to college at.
Yep.
China specifically wants to become the new place where people go for their education.
Yep.
Their post-secondary education.
And that looks like it's going to be the case in the near future. So the National Education Association president, Becky Pringle, said that if successful, Trump's continued actions will hurt all students by sending class sizes soaring, cutting job training programs, making higher education more expensive and out of reach for middle class families, taking away special education services for students with disabilities, and gutting civil rights protections. Especially when it comes to special education services for kids with disabilities, how is this going to work out?
There's Title One protections right now, but like Title One will go away if what is it like if they transfer everything to the states and the DOE basically has like no funding and no staff or whatnot. There's no way for the DOE to guarantee that the states are adequately giving Title One protections to students with disabilities. And just so we're clear, when we're talking about students with disabilities, we're not talking about like the kids that have like not just the kids that have like Down syndrome or like autism spectrum disorder. We're talking about kids that are deaf that require ASL teachers and whatnot. We're talking about kids that are blind that require like Braille textbooks like to do basic reading and whatnot. We're talking about a large. We're talking about what is it, dyslexia. What is it? We're talking about like assistance with students that have dyslexia, whether that be like dyslexia via like reading, like actual like reading text, or we're talking about like dyslexia when we're talking about like numerical dyslexia, where people have an issue with numbers, getting numbers mixed up when they're doing like math. So all of the protections that the state would bring in or not the state, the federal government would bring in and make sure and like have like watchdogs to make sure that the schools are providing these. The people that are supposed to be watching that are not going to be there anymore. Like the words, these are the Title One protections, will be on a piece of paper somewhere, but there's nobody to bring that piece of paper to the state and say, hey, you got to do this. Even if the courts tell them, there isn't a staff to bring that to the state schools and say, hey, you got to do this.
So oversight's definitely going to be one of the bigger contentions going on when these things are implemented. So that's just going to be more students falling through the cracks.
It like not to take this away from education, but it's the same thing that Trump is doing with the CHIPS Act. He's basically taking all of the what is it, the NTIS workers, and just fired all of them so that they can't complete the CHIPS Act plants and everything that they had in place for that on time. So if you fire all the workers, there's nobody to actually like create and do the thing. But you still have like the CHIPS Act and everything on a piece of paper saying this is what we're doing and this is what has to be done. This is what Trump is doing with the Department of Education. Like he's doing this across the board. This stuff is still on the books. The Department of Education still exists. There's just literally nobody to enforce anything.
Yeah, and that's the this is what people were talking about when they're talking about keeping the Congress versus just losing the White House, because it's bad enough everything that's happening now, because he's not only making the department ineffective, but he's making it so that it would take years to rebuild this stuff. But if he manages to get something passed, like in a budget deal, which is what he's trying to do this year, because he does have both houses of Congress, if he manages to get something statutory that authorizes him to do this stuff, then he can make it permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to have some shot at post-apocalyptic survival after this term is over, then we're going to have to look to the legislature for that.
Yep. Let's just hope that they sit on their thumbs until the midterms.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not looking good first 2-3 months in.
So this is another in the slew of executive orders that have been thrown out. And so far, we've had a lot of these executive orders basically kicked back by the courts. What are the odds that this one gets contested by the courts as well? And what do you think the outcome's going to be?
Well, who does the court have an army to enforce what the court wants it to do?
I can't say that they do.
Does the department have the watchdogs to do the oversight?
I'm going to say no.
All right. And where are the inspector generals? Majority, a lot of them got fired. I'm just saying right now.
Yeah, I had to wonder.
We're going to get a ruling from a judge saying you can't do this, and no way to enforce it, and nobody to have oversight on whether it's enforced.
We already had our first big incident, which was those people that were being deported. 3 planes taking off. And before the 3rd plane took off, we already had a ruling by the judge that said, you can't do this. These planes can't be allowed to take off. The 2 that were in the air, they could have turned them around because they were still in the air. They didn't turn them around. But even if you think there's wiggle room there, that 3rd plane, 10 minutes after the order had been given, the plane took off. So, yeah, I mean, already we have a court order that has been defied by the President of the United States. And we don't know what the reaction to that's going to be. Like, if there's any... I mean, what can the courts do? They can give the order, but after that, how you get it enforced, I have no idea.
Yeah.
The other one was the federal employees that were told to rehire these probationary employees, and we still haven't seen how they're going to carry that out. So,
right. But like I said, what is it? Who's the inspector general? Does the department have any oversight? And what is the mechanism to force those people back into those jobs?
I don't have answers for that.
I'm just saying, like that is what you're up against right now. So we can have the courts screaming for days that this is unconstitutional, this is unlawful, unless Congress is going to act and like draw up articles of impeachment on their own president. I don't think that like anything is going to happen here, because like right now, like the defying of these orders here with the planes, that is an impeachable offense for not complying with the courts. Like, Democrats could bring that up as an impeachable offense if they actually had a spine that wasn't made of gelatin that's been watered down and put in a microwave.
And even if they did have a spine, like we saw how impeachment went the last 2 times. They should do it anyway, but at the same time, we know it won't work.
Right.
So all we can really do is continue to point it out, because we know that if you do develop a spine and start doing this kind of stuff, it hits them in the approval rating, right? And ultimately, that's what you want, is for people to become aware of what's happening.
Right. I mean, it's better to at least twitch instead of be dead roadkill.
Well, I think if services for people's special needs children all of a sudden isn't available, if school lunches aren't available, if severe deficits in curriculum are seen by parents, like, I think it'll be kind of too late at that point, but at the same time, it will be noticeable and will affect the approval rating, I would assume.
Well, it already is. But also, approval rating isn't going to matter for a while, because we're pretty far off from any election that's going to have an effect on any of this.
Right.
So,
I mean,
best case scenario is we flip the House back, but that doesn't stop the Senate from continuing to confirm appointments and all of that, and even that's a year and a half away. So, I mean, there's very little that can be done at that level. I think there's something that can be done at the state level and at the municipal level and all of that. Like, there are things that my local school district can do to mitigate some of this. We can certainly sue. I think probably the most, if there's any hope at all, it's in the courts. It's going to be because because the courts have been ruling against Trump multiple times. And Trump so far, except for with those 3 planes, Trump so far has not outright defied a court order. However, you can tell that he's gearing up to do that.
Yep.
And he's just testing the waters to see if he can get what he wants without having to defy the courts.
Yep.
But there's going to come a point at which he's done with that, and he's just going to do what he's going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 100% agree. It's just a waiting game. Like I said, we just got to hope they sit on their thumbs until the midterms.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to avoid the topic of what the government is doing at the moment.
Well, I mean, it doesn't help that Chuck Schumer took and just agreed with the budget bill that they were putting through. I mean, that doesn't help in any way, shape, or form, I don't think.
Yeah, I saw an interview with him today. It was pretty pathetic. He was talking to, he was on MSNBC trying to explain it. I think he realizes he fucked up, but he's basically saying that there's going to come a time when we have to resist at all levels. But he says he needs, but he says he thinks we're not there yet.
Yep.
I think it's pretty clear that we are there. I think the 3 planes are exactly what tells us that. But he says that we're not. So, but I think he does realize he fucked up, and I think that there are people within the party who want to challenge him. I think AOC might run against him in the primary.
Yeah.
So you know.
Yeah, you know, the Orokai are at Minas Tirith. They've broken through the 3rd gate, but now is not the time.
Right. You know. Got to see the whites of their eyes, I guess.
Right. They're completely black.
Yeah.
Their eyes.
That's true. Tortured elves.
So,
Yeah.
are these changes going to be the thing that finally gets maybe some movement in who's in office on the Democrat side?
Get some what in office?
Some change on who's in office, like, Chuck Schumer being possibly replaced by AOC. Like, are we going to have some movement in the Democrat Party, do we think? Or is it still just going to be status quo?
Yeah, only movement I'm going to be seeing is bowel movement, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if AOC decides to make that run. I know she's popular in parts of New York, and maybe she's I think it depends. Is it open primaries in New York? Because that's going to make a difference too. Whether or not people who are not Democrats can vote in that race. But yeah, but I mean, keep in mind, even if she wins that race, that doesn't make her the new majority leader. That just makes her the new senator from New York, which means there will be another establishment person will become majority leader somewhere in the country. So I don't know. But there's also the age thing, having a young leader. I don't think it's been a long time since we've had a young leader
in like the Senate,
in Congress. Yeah, just generally, or anywhere in the party. Like everyone seems to be. I mean, Schumer's in his 70s.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind having a 40-year-old leader, somebody with some energy.
I mean, that's kind of what I would have assumed we wanted, but
when the average age of your congressman and senator is higher than what Social Security will pay out, not everyone's over 115 years old.
Because ultimately now you're talking more long-term thinking, right? But there's got to come a point at which Trump's not in office anymore. And at that point, you can't just have somebody come in and just like maintain that, like that's over. Like that's just not an option anymore. Whoever takes Trump's place, if it's a Democrat, is going to have to rebuild entire departments and agencies from scratch
Yep.
almost. And so, if all you do is take whatever Trump gives you to inherit and then like just stop the bleeding, that's not going to be enough. Not this time around.
Yeah.
You could make that argument for 2020 because Trump stopped short of doing a lot of the kind of stuff that he's doing now. He wasn't going total scorched earth in his first term, but I think now he is. And if you look at everything he's done just in 2 months, imagine what it's going to be like after 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, we're at a point now where we've hit like accelerationism.
Yeah.
So it's going to be like that if he gets out of office and like a Democrat gets into office, if a Democrat gets into office after him, that there's no holds barred anymore. There's no kumbaya. There's no everybody sit in a circle, hold hands while we play guitar and sing kumbaya anymore.
Yeah, you're going to have somebody who's willing to match energy with what the GOP will have done in this next 4 years. Yeah,
we're going to need to have more security inside the House just to make sure that the actual Congress people are not armed.
yeah. January 6th is going to look like a picnic.
Right.
But also, like, look at what the stock market's doing. Like, this can't keep going the way it is.
No.
I mean, at some point, even the private sector is going to be like, hey, wait a minute.
I mean, for me, it's not a problem. The market can keep doing this. I mean, that's not a problem for me, but it's going to be a problem for everyone else. You got 401ks that basically go into the toilet because of this. You have, I tell you right now, like if the market crashes, like people are predicting it's going to, and those 401ks are gone, the conservative voting bloc that relies on that retirement fund is going to suddenly not be conservative anymore.
Right. Yeah. That is one possibility out of all this. Although teachers have a certain level of protection, right? Because we've got TRS. A lot of that's tied into markets too, though.
Yep.
So I just don't know. Maybe Social Security seems like a safer bet these days.
Well, if we can still have it, in 4 years.
Right. That's another thing. And can the Department of Education do anything to TRS? I wonder.
I mean, anything seems like it's on the table at this point, so I really can't say. They're not going through lawful means at this point.
Is TRS done at a federal level? I thought it was done at a state level.
It's not done at a federal level, but I think that there's regulations around it and I think. Let me just find out because I've never really looked into that before. It's done at state level here in Texas.
Mm-hmm. What is it? Is there like maybe federal guarantees or something like that with it? Like it's like an agreement between like states. Like
I think the way it's taxed is one thing that's handled federally, and because we get the same tax breaks on it that you would for Social Security payments.
Right.
Let's see. I don't know if it would even be the Department of Education that does that or some other federal department, IRS maybe.
Would labor do it?
No, it does look like it's at the state level. Each state has its own TRS equivalent pension plan. Yeah. But then it would still get its carve-outs from the federal government in terms of like how you get your tax breaks and whatnot, I guess.
Yeah.
But then that makes me wonder how red states are going to handle TRS now that they feel this newfound freedom, from the federal government.
Anybody that completed with a high school degree is going to become a teacher here pretty soon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A gun carrying one too.
Right.
Oh, yeah. There's also something happened today or yesterday with regards to Doge going into one building. I think it was for a nonprofit actually, and went straight to the gun safe and started seizing all the guns. And nobody knows why. Freaking weird.
I didn't hear anything about that.
Yeah, let's see if I can find it.
So Jack says, yes, each state has their own, but everything is interconnected via secondary tax legislation in our interstate agreements, etc.
Oh,
There
that
you
would
go.
make sense then. Yeah. So like if you're teaching in, let's say, uh like Arkansas, and then you're going to be going to like teach in Missouri, that way like the pension or whatnot like transfers over. That would make sense.
And so I'm also hearing that Doge is going to make some changes to the identification system with Social Security, and they possibly will be doing some things with Social Security in the future. So
Well, all I'm going to say is that, people were yelling and screaming about Democrats coming for your guns. Now you have a non-government agency walking into, that's quote unquote a government agency, walking into a nonprofit to seize their weapons.
Yeah. And I think a blueprint of everything that's going to happen in the Department of Education too is here in Texas. Like we have a little city called Southlake. It's the Carroll Independent School District, and they were the ones that there was a sort of a famous blog that came out a couple of years ago on it. This is the one where they were basically firing any teacher that they thought wasn't a conservative. And I happen to know somebody who was one of those teachers who she managed to leave before she was fired, but that they were going after just one after another after another. I think she had like colored tinges in her hair that raised questions. Stuff like that. She had some purple in there. It's amazing what was causing them to look into certain teachers for a variety of reasons or whatever. But very famously, there was a teachers meeting in the teachers lounge or whatever with all the teachers, and they were explaining to them that you have to go through all of the books that are in your classroom for available reading, and you have
Oh,
to
yeah.
that was the
I
one where they
remember
said
that.
you have to teach both sides. And
Yes.
they were, and in the books that they were talking about in particular were these books about the Holocaust. Like, wait a minute, teach both sides of the Holocaust? And they
Right.
said yes.
Well,
Yes.
I think wasn't the Mouse, like the Mouse series,
Yeah.
like the comic
Mhm.
books?
they
That was
banned
one of them. Yeah.
Right. Now we need one that was called was it Cats instead?
Yeah. Gotta have both sides. Yeah. And so they were told it was either I think they also had to teach both sides about slavery too. So
Yeah.
now nobody knew what that would look like. I'm sure as soon as they started investigating it and started sounding ridiculous. But that's where we are now, to the point where, and again, it's not because the people who are leading these meetings, like in this particular, my friend of mine who was in one of those meetings, like the person who was doing it wasn't particularly political. She didn't want to do any of this stuff. It was just that she was terrified of what the parents would do. And she just didn't want any teacher triggering any parent about anything that they would consider to be political. And so, they,
Yeah.
basically, they didn't want her to teach both sides of the Holocaust. They just wanted her to stop talking about the Holocaust. That was really what it was. It's just they couldn't say that out loud, so they had to put it the other way about teaching both sides.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure you're going to have a lot of this. I think the lost cause theory might make a comeback in certain states.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
it never left in Texas, but
Well, I'm just saying that it might be more reinforced.
No, you're right. Yeah.
What is the
Sure.
lost cause theory?
Lost cause theory is what was basically fronted by the Daughters of the Confederacy, and it was basically a push to make it seem as if like the Civil War was an unfortunate thing, and that the lives of slaves and the slave owners.
Wait, did you
was-
say what war was that? What did you say? What war?
Oh, the Civil War.
What I'm familiar with the War of Northern Aggression.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The War of Northern Aggression against the peaceful slave
Yeah.
owners
Okay, that's
and
what you're talking about.
the
All right.
well-treated
Right.
slaves that enjoyed being with their slave owners.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. Now I get it. Yeah. That,
Yeah, that's called the lost cause theory.
I
yeah.
heard
Lethe, I grew up
someone
with all of that.
I heard someone saying something very similar to that yesterday, where they were expressing that a lot of the people in the South were just mad that the North had come into their land and they wanted to fight back. And they had no stake in slavery, didn't own slaves. They were just fighting for their land and fighting because they're here.
Well, hold on a second. I mean, to a degree, that's true. Like, it is true that the government itself is not exactly the same as the people who were drafted into the war and had to fight or whatever. And if you were, a citizen of Georgia, even if you were against slavery personally or had no stake in it, you were going to be forced to fight into that war too.
Yep.
It's the government, right? It's the Confederacy that was in the wrong. But I wouldn't necessarily say every single soldier that was fighting in the war like fully understood what was going on. That part I agree with. Now I'm sure that they were using it to justify the Confederacy's existence at all, and that's a whole different point. But these people will often take a reasonable point and they'll do a Mott and Bailey with it, where I'm just defending the average person who had to pick up a gun and was forced into the it was brother against brother sort of thing. But then when you're not around anymore, suddenly they're back to singing Dixie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a defense of people that fly the rebel flag. Was where the
Yeah,
argument came from.
see, there's your Mott and Bailey right there. Everything you just said that they were trying to sound reasonable with is reasonable. It is true that the average person who had was in many cases forced to fight in that war weren't responsible for the very existence of slavery, right? But then to make that argument is not the same as to pick up the rebel flag and fly it as if it's the thing you believe in, because the flag represents the very idea of the nation, which is very different than the idea of the person who happens to live in the countryside. Like those are
and the flag that they're actually flying right now isn't actually like the flag of the Confederacy.
all right.
It's actually
Yep.
what is it? It's
The battle
it's
flag.
not. Is it? I don't even think it's the battle flag.
It's the Northern Virginia battle flag, right?
It's. I thought it was a naval flag, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I'm sure it has more than one. Like these things get recycled a lot.
Right, but I could have sworn like the actual like Confederate flag has a small section with the stars and bars, and then there's red and white on it, like stripes on it, if I'm not mistaken.
If it's in a square, then it's with the St. Andrew's cross and white scars. That's the Army of Northern Virginia's battle flag. But that doesn't mean that other entities didn't have the same thing.
What I was just trying to get at is that the thing that the people use nowadays to call it like the rebel flag is actually an obscure flag that wasn't commonly used by the Confederacy, that they have co-opted to mean the Confederacy in modern times.
Yeah, we did when I was a kid. We had that very flag as part of our high school emblem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's hard to go any place south of like Iowa and Nebraska and not see it plastered all over the place.
That had to be deprogrammed out of me after I graduated high school. Like I had no idea.
Really?
I mean, I knew what it was, but I also figured, well, that's, just like everybody else, like I was a stupid kid. I just figured that was a controversy from a long time ago, and you can have pride in your heritage and not agree with every single policy that happened under that flag or something like that, But what was crazy is it was the battle flag of the Northern Virginian Army, and here we were in Texas flying it for our high school as if it somehow had anything to do with Texas heritage.
Considering they're the
So
last state in the union to give up slavery, yeah, I'm gonna say it had a little
yeah,
bit to do with it.
yeah, no, yeah, right. But I'm just saying, uh, if they're going to make the argument that this is part of our heritage, well, no, that particular flag is part of Northern Virginia's heritage, not Texas's heritage, right? The Confederate flag might have something to do with our past, but certainly something to be ashamed of, not proud of.
I mean, that would obviously be my argument, but hearing it come up is pretty daunting in itself. The idea that
It
this
was
flag
interesting.
stands for the people that gave their lives in regards to this particular movement.
When I was a kid, even the black people in my school were in favor of that flag. But it was also because they were ignorant of its past, just as the rest of us were. And once they learned about it, all the black kids in our school flipped on it like pretty fast, like within a couple of years. And then it got really bad because then it was the white kids and the black kids like just arguing all the time over it. And the white kids felt a deep sense of betrayal. You get that? Seriously, we took that kind of stuff seriously. Like we I didn't because I didn't care that much about it, but a lot of us like flew those flags like outside of our cars and just we it was called flagging, where you just drive up and down the street with that thing on your like flapping on your car.
You saw Moon's post. Yep.
Yep.
It's not the same without
Oh.
that. Every now and again. Yeah, I think this is going to be part of the issue. Like, the curriculum that's going to be taught is going to sow more division in America, like, without a question. Like, what's taught in schools?
And that,
please.
But that also depends on, like, we're talking like individual state curriculums. So like the algebra that they're going to teach in Wisconsin is not going to look the same as the algebra that they're going to teach in Georgia.
It is a known fact that if you want your math scores to go up, teach that pi is equal to 3.0. It's easier to do all the calculations.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And therefore,
just round up.
Yeah. That's how you beat the test scores, man.
Round up or round down. I mean, it works either way. 4, 3, they're close enough to each other.
You might not want to build a bridge based on those assumptions, but yeah, that's what you do.
It'll get you through the textbook.
Yeah.
Worst space program ever. 3-ish. Thank you, Kyle.
I mean, can you imagine like a lot of times, especially when it comes to when we're talking like early education classes, like phonics can get skipped over really easily, or it can be like watered down to a point where it's not taught effectively to small kids, especially at like first grade level. So with a lot of students, especially poorer students, they have less access to books, which means they have less access to reading materials, so they have less access to seeing how these like phonemes are constructed, and what is it like phonics in general, how they're done via reading. So right now we have a problem because schools have like poorer students or students in poverty have less access to books. This is only going to exacerbate that even more, because a lot of these schools are going to start pulling books off shelves at the same time. So the books that the kids would have access to, they're going to have access to less books. And the curriculum that's going to be coming when it comes to teaching phonics and teaching like basic reading skills, it's going to be state dependent. So you could go through an entire, elementary school education and have barely any understanding of phonics, spelling, or anything like that because of how the curriculum is set up and your ability to have access to books.
Jeez.
And basically, if you can't read, the rest of education is extremely difficult. So early childhood education as it pertains to reading is probably number one top priority of any class you could possibly take.
So I had a question about Common Core math. A person I know that's in school to become a teacher has been complaining that Common Core math is just something that shouldn't be taught.
Pre-STEM.
Pre-STEM? Okay. Because she's
Yeah,
basically
like
complaining
pre-
like it's in grade school.
it's what you would call I would call pre-STEM, kind of like how you have like different things that kids can do that gets their mindset into like a programming mindset where they like follow the path to try and find like the like turn left, turn right, sort of like games or whatnot to get them to their mind to think in a programming kind of setting. This is math for STEM in that kind of programming setting where your mind is trying to think of different multiple ways to analyze like numbers and data so that you're not following just a single methodical way of solving a math problem.
And number sense too. Like,
Yeah.
I've had math teachers explain this to me many, many times. People always look at those new methods of doing math. I say new now, but they're like 30 years old at this point.
Yeah.
But and it's not what they recognize. And when you write it down on a chalkboard, it looks like you're jumping through a lot more hoops to arrive at the same answer that you could do much more simply with the traditional method of doing math. But if you look at the traditional method of doing math, it's faster, but it's because we've memorized certain outcomes rather than tried to work through each part of the outcome. And as a result, yeah, it does look simpler and you can do it a lot faster, but you don't necessarily understand how you arrived at that answer. You just like know how to repeat the process. Whereas the kid is learning, for instance, if a kid looks at an 8, the kid might see that as actually a 5 and a 3.
Yeah.
Because they're chunking the numbers in ways that their brain can comprehend.
Or a 2 and a 6, or a 4 and a 4, or a 1
exactly.
and a 7.
Yeah, and that's a bunch of extra steps, right? So it looks like, oh, this is stupid. It takes you 3 times as long to get to the same answer that I'm getting or whatever. But you understand more of how you got there as a result. And so even though you're putting in more work, in grade 3, you're able to learn a lot more in grade 8 than you would have before because things have become intuitive to you numerically that they wouldn't have for somebody my age.
This is the thing that I like to say to people, especially, and this goes for basically any subject inside of education. The majority of parents and people that complain about Common Core, the only thing they're really complaining about is how to get the answer. Like the entire focus people have is how to get the answer. Where in a teacher's brain and a teacher's mindset is that the process of getting to the answer is more important than the answer itself.
Yep. 100%.
So when people are thinking about like we need to change the curriculum, like why aren't we teaching kids to do finances, like or like in class, or like how to do taxes in school, like so they can do their own taxes? It's not that we're not teaching that. It's the fact that people want people to have like discernible answers, like to like test and to this. They don't necessarily want the process to get to that. And if you're teaching math in a way that the kids understand the process, then there's no need to teach them how to exactly do their taxes, because if they understand the process of how the math works, then they can do the taxes on their own.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say in terms of literacy, like, which is something I'm a little bit more involved in, that I understand a little bit better than I do with math, but it's the same thing. 1/3 of the AP Lit test is poetry. And a lot of English teachers are like sort of terrified of poetry, which is how I ended up getting into the AP Lit stuff, because I would just take over their classes for a month and just do poetry so that they could get better AP scores or whatever. That's one of the things I used to do, and don't do it anymore, but I did it for years. And it's because you are like, when you're paying attention to meter and scansion and rhyme and all the other things that are involved with all of the tropes and stuff, you you start to intuitively understand language in a way that you didn't before. So even though when you're writing an email, you're not doing poetry, having learned poetry makes you better at writing emails. Like that connection is just there. But it's stuff that nobody really thinks about. So like especially if you ask a conservative very often, if you ask them how important it is to learn poetry at the high school level, I think they would probably tell you it's not important at all.
Right. Like for me, it's extremely important, especially for ESL classes, because being able to read sections like where you have like a noun phrase, a verbal phrase, and like a prepositional phrase within a sentence, being able to do it on a beat makes it very easy for the kids to remember. It makes it very easy for them to repeat it.
It
And the
makes
thing
pronunciation
is
more
that
intuitive. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
being able understanding how poetry things like especially like things like iambic pentameter like that definitely helps in the sense of like so instead is in so when kids look at words and they see like the words like get out of here and you say get out of here that it translates better to them than trying to individually do each individual word at the same time. But unless you have a background in like poetry or what is it, or even stage play, like playwriting or whatnot, like this sort of thing is like very difficult to teach, like for at like in ESL.
So the
No, it's
teaching
true.
student
And
is watching, and she said she agrees, but if teachers don't have enough time to thoroughly communicate that because the process takes longer, then what's the point if people are going to get behind and still don't know how to do it?
well, the point is the time that you're investing at those younger ages into developing number sense saves you time at the later ages, right?
Yes.
So like the point is well taken that if it takes you longer, you need to get a better return on investment with that time, right? But if you spend that time at the right ages, then you can get a lot more efficient at the later ages. It's the same thing for like recently we were debating in class affirmative action, and one of my arguments is that it's not that affirmative action is necessarily a bad concept in general. It's that we apply it at the wrong time. We applied it at the college level where it backfires. But if you applied it at the pre-K through elementary levels, it would pay off dividends because it would make it so that when those kids make it to the high school level, they don't get outcompeted with other people who naturally had better education at those younger ages because of their wealth status. Right. So that time investment that happens at the younger ages, this is why universal pre-K is super important, I think. That time investment that you invest in the younger ages pays off so much later on, and now you can spend more time taking advanced mathematics or taking engineering stuff or stats or whatever because you aren't having to catch up on all that other stuff from the earlier years. In fact, I've been arguing for I'm mainly a high school person. That's where I've spent most of my time, and I can tell you that I've long argued that there should be a reverse pay scale on this, which is pre-K and K and elementary teachers should make more money than high school teachers.
Yes.
And the younger the age, the more they should get paid.
Yep.
Because my job is so much easier if they're doing their job.
To add a little bit to this, it's kind of like this. Like my older brother left home when he was 18 to go join the military, and my older sister had severe allergies. I was 10 at the time, and I lived on a farm. The only way for us to get all the work done on the farm was for me to learn how to drive the tractor and drive the car and the truck at age 10. So I was able to do all that, get everything all done. You know, it was bumpy at first, but by the time I turned 15 to get my license in the state of Kansas, there was nothing I needed to go. I didn't even have to go to driver's safety course or anything like that. I was already like had the ability to basically like drive, just take the test and go. So, and I'm a better driver because of it. So, I mean, like having those driving skills at a younger age, even though it was illegal, made it so that I was a better driver as I got older.
Although it might not have been illegal if you were just on your private property, right?
Oh no, I had
on...
to drive on. I had to drive on public roads,
Oh, okay.
like to get to the fields. Like I literally had to hook the track or the track or the trailer up to the back of the truck, was
Right.
full of hay bales, and then drive it up to the barn on the public road. to
Yeah,
do
fair
that.
enough. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can see that. Because I remember when I was, a lot younger, I did drive around, but it was on my grandfather's property that he intended to turn into a farm one day, which he never did. But I was able to drive around there, no problem.
I had to drive a skid loader about 5 miles. What
Oh,
is it on public roads to my uncle's house?
nice, nice.
I
But
was
I'm
12
sure,
at
like,
the
if
time.
you're in real, very rural areas, I'm sure local law enforcement kind of like understood.
Yep. The first vehicle I ever learned to drive was a 55 Minneapolis Moline. And if you don't know what that is, it's a tractor.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
That's another thing. I don't know if Department of Education has much to do with this or if it's just Department of Labor, but all of those new laws in red states, like allowing child labor,
Yeah.
like that's going to have a big impact on education too, right? Because you can't work and be at school at the same time.
Well, unless they decide that, kids that don't get that don't have a free school lunch program, they make them do work studies.
Mm.
Can you imagine if they did that? You have like
Mm-hmm.
kids that are like 12, 13 that have to go and clean the school in order to get a school lunch.
Yeah. They're already talking about it. They've been talking about that for many years, actually. I wouldn't be surprised to see that starting to get implemented now. And it's already happened in private schools.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like, I understand, like kids cleaning schools, like this happens here, but it happens in a way that they have a groundskeeper that'll go through and make sure everything is sanitized. Like the kids make sure the things are cleaned, but they actually have a guy that goes through and makes sure that everything is sanitized.
Mm-hmm.
My fear is that they're going to have 7-year-olds scrubbing toilets,
Yeah,
with dangerous chemicals. And those kids are going to go home with burns on their hands or burns on their clothes or like bleach stains on them.
and also
they're not.
when kids see that some of the kids are doing janitorial duties or whatever, they're going to get treated differently by their peers
Exactly.
because of that, and we know that that's the case, right?
Well, I mean, it was the case when you'd have like that everyone has school lunch, and then you have like those secondary lunches where it was like a sandwich and an apple in a paper bag that they gave to kids. And that was a distinct marker of poverty for those kids at the same time.
Right.
So, I mean,
Yeah, well, I think we're going to go back to also like knowing when you get the free lunch at the cafeteria line, right?
Yep.
Because right now, a lot of districts have gone over to this thing where everyone has to scan their card, and if you're on a free lunch, there's no way to know based on that.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of stuff can go away now because those kind of regs are getting dropped too.
Yep.
So that's something else.
Yeah. And what is it? And you and I both know that children can be ruthless. Like between the ages of like 4th grade to high school, children are absolutely ruthless.
Yeah, I mean, I've told you about my
poverty.
My concentric circles of hell diagram, right? Like where, I think probably 7th grade is the worst, and then it goes up from there. Yeah,
pretty much. Pretty much.
Give me elementary or high school any day. Middle school, oof.
Oh, well, I mean, like the thing is like teaching middle school is its own animal. But the one thing I will say about it is that it makes joining these spaces a lot easier because you're not you don't have to worry about
the pass. Yeah.
Right. You don't have to worry about like people stepping on your ego or people making you mad by things they say because it just water off a duck's back.
I remember I was doing like things like AP Lit and speech and debate for so long, and then I had a colleague who taught 7th grade, and I took over his class for like 2 weeks. And it was just like that scene from Kindergarten Cop, they're pushing me around.
Everything's all over. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, I just
Yep.
couldn't, it was amazing to me. And I thought it would be easy because I had done elementary stuff before. And those kids are so sweet and they walk in and they just want to please you and all of that. You know, we're talking about like first, second grade kids, especially the kindergartners, right? But
Yeah.
then seventh grade, that's gone. That's long over. But they're still
Right.
not mature enough to be able to rein it in. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Keep me away from middle school.
Oh yeah. Now I'm
I don't know how
that,
to.
that that's
I have middle
like
school
that.
kids
That's where
now,
I
but it's
teach.
different because it's the middle school kids that I have now are these like elite the after school program type things, mostly Asian kids, and so they're a seventh grader there is about 10th grade in ability,
Yeah.
in terms of how they're trained and how they behave and everything else. So it's different for them. But I'm just talking about your normal middle
Yeah.
school white kid. Like, no, no, no.
Yep.
Especially if it's a class of, 25.
Oh, 25. You don't have like a class of 30 or 40?
Oh, no, my maximum class size is 8 now
Right. I know.
because of
I
the job
know,
I have
but
now. But yeah,
I'm just saying, like, I teach
when I was
classes
in
of like
public school,
30, 30
yeah,
plus.
yeah. I no, I mean, I could look if it was give me 30 AP Lit seniors and juniors, no problem. I'll take
Right.
50 even. But seventh graders, more than 12 of them? No way. No, 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 no.
Yeah. I do. What is it like for how my job, the details for my job are set up is I do nursery school and kindergarten. Then I'll do
Mm-hmm,
first and second grade in the elementary schools.
mm-hmm.
And then I also do the junior high school English classes at the same time. Now, the first and second grade is entirely my curriculum, and so is uh, the kindergarten and nursery schools. But when it comes to junior high school, because of how like the Japanese system is set up, I have to teach with another teacher that is
Mm,
Japanese inside that classroom for particular like purposes as it pertains to how they want the textbook to be taught to the students.
mm.
So
Yeah.
it's one of those it's a weird requirement, but the thing is that because I've been at the same location for so long now, the kids that I taught in
Mm,
kindergarten and nursery school are now in junior high school.
nice. So you get them again.
So right, but the thing is I get them again, but the thing is that they know that I know their parents because we live in the same town.
Oh
Right.
no.
Like they have a special thing where the teachers can go and talk to like the parents, but none of like there's like two teachers in the school that live in town and everybody else is just like miles and miles away, so they're not even like communally like known within like the community itself. If I come over and knock on their door and say, hey, your kid's being a problem, those parents are going to jump. If one of the other teachers is a random teacher that they don't know from the community comes and knocks on their door, they may like hem and haw a
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. No, that's the way it is. That's what, like, I had to ask you advice when I was first took this job because,
Hmm.
because I didn't know how to handle the Asian parents or whatever. But now
Yeah.
that I do know, it's so much easier just having a good relationship with them and having them like enforce with what's going on with their parent. It's so the opposite of what I was used to.
Yeah.
That on balance. I mean, there's ups and downs to it, but on balance, I'd much rather have them than your average American parent.
I was gonna ask,
Yep.
what's the difference in the outcomes? Like, do you think this is a better way of things being handled?
Like
If
in what
if
sense?
American parents took a similar interest that the Asian parents will?
Well, here's the thing you got to take into account, okay? Where you're talking about parents that Rich is talking about here that usually have come to the United States that have either an educational or financial background as well, and they're heavily focused socially on education. I live in a poor rural area of Japan where out of like the 300 kids that are in the junior high school, there may be 20 kids total that have parents that would be like Rich's parents that he deals with.
Hmm.
and I have a good 200 plus that would behave exactly like American parents. So there's a stereotype of Asian parents inside the United States, and some of that has to do with like the family historical background, financial background, and like social background of those families at the same time.
Okay, so there's a lot of different factors involved. And
Exactly.
Zephyr asked a question of Rich, how to handle Asian parents so he knows how to act like an Asian parent.
I mean, honestly, the best piece of advice that Despy ever gave me was to stand my ground. So if their kid is not performing well at a tournament, let's say, because they don't have to worry about grades, they don't have to worry about test scores, like none of that, because I'm an after school program, right? I 100%, that's all I do now. I'm no longer work during school hours. And so the only way to measure my performance is how kids do at debate tournaments. And if they're winning trophies and medals and things like that, that can then go on to their college applications so they can get into a good college. That's ultimately what the parents care about. And if their kid doesn't do well at a tournament, at first, like in my very first year of working here, I didn't know how to handle it when they were upset that their kid wasn't progressing as much. And Despy said, "Well, you just say, if your child had followed my advice, he would have done better, but he didn't, and so now he's losing." And
Yep.
that absolutely, I gotta admit, I was a little bit skeptical of that advice at first, but then every single time I used it, I was like, I'm talking about people who are like CFOs of their company, right? They're not used
Yep.
to people doing that with them. But if I say something like that, man, they immediately are on my side, and whatever I want to do with that kid, they'll support. And
Yep.
so, and suddenly I've got an enforcer at home that makes sure that the homework gets done, that makes sure that speeches get recorded. They'll even buy like expensive video equipment for them to record speeches on and things like that to submit to tournaments. They'll do whatever. And I only have to say it once and it gets done. So it's, once I figured that out, it became way easier for me to do my job.
And the
Whereas,
more,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, whereas at public schools, which I've coached debate at public schools for like 30 years prior to that, it was really more the parents didn't even care how their kids did at tournaments. They saw it as babysitting essentially, and so I struggled to get their parents to even say they were proud of their kid for qualifying for state, in Lincoln Douglas debate or something, which is an amazing accomplishment. And they were like, "What? Now I have to pay for them to go to Austin to debate?" And half the time they didn't even want to go. So it was definitely the opposite problem when it came to those other families.
I'm just gonna say the more tasks that you give the parents, like that you can say like this is things that you can do to help improve, and you literally give the parents homework assignments
Yeah,
for
yeah.
their kid. That those will be followed to a T.
I just started adding the parents. So we use Google Classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I had an account for them and I had an account for their parents. So their parents could
Mm-hmm.
log in and see what the homework was every week. And then, now
Mm-hmm.
now it gets done. I
Yep.
walk into class and I've got 8 videos submitted to my classroom for me to review before class even starts.
Yep.
And so that was
It
something I
makes it
was
so much.
wondering, like, would getting parents more involved in their children's education create better outcomes with the current climate of the Department of Education being defunded? And how even reasonable would that be?
It's not very reasonable now, just due to what I would just say is just poverty in general. Like you're not going to be able to get parents to be on board if they're working 65 to 80 hours a week and literally have no time for anything else but work. And there's the stress level is just too high that the parents of those children might just be in fuck it mode.
Mm.
Yeah, I will say it's a little bit different. And I was in a 70% Hispanic school district, and so the moms there didn't work. right? Because the traditional households or whatever. And so I could get those moms to be involved. Now, obviously, like in many cases, the moms didn't even speak English. But if I could get them involved in any kind of way, like to help out with a bake sale or especially when it came to like helping their behavior for their kid. I remember I had one kid who was 16 years old, like very sort of muscly. And he just, every time I tried to get him to do his work, he would like push back at me. And he even threatened to beat me up one time.
What?
And yeah. And so what I did was he knew I wouldn't call his parents because his parents don't speak English. So I called anyway, got his mom on the phone, spoke my broken Spanish to her to where I could barely get my thought across because I was trying to get him to come to my class after school to like catch up on work that he wasn't doing well. That was he was very upset at that. But because these Latino kids are mama's boys, he, you know, even though he wouldn't do anything for me, he would do it for his mom. And before long, because of that, I think in part because he realized because I was able to partner with his mom despite the language barrier. Within 3 weeks, he had totally turned around. Like he was starting to get A's on like daily quizzes and things like that, which he didn't think was possible because he was one of those kids that always had bad grades. And for years after that, he would chase me down the hall to show me some grade he got, some A he got in a paper somewhere or something. Because all it took was cooperation from the mom. Like if you can get the parents involved, like Despy's right, that's not always reasonable, right? But sometimes you can find a way where the parents are willing to add something to the equation if they can. They just didn't know that they could. They thought that they had to know a particular subject matter or something like that. You know,
If we're talking about like a Latino mom,
yeah,
the only question we have to ask that kid is how many chanclas did it take?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
that's all.
I mean, he was twice.
How many?
He was twice the size of his mom, right? But I think what
Don't
it came
matter.
down to,
Don't
I know.
matter.
I know, yeah.
It don't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. I mean, he cared a lot what she thought. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. No.
But I had a lot of experiences like that especially with kids that you would think don't have a strong family life, and they actually do. They just the machismo culture made it look like they were to be tougher than they were.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, because the student teacher I was talking about was complaining that when she was doing the student teaching, a lot of the students like didn't know how to form sentences for journaling, didn't understand like what was being asked. Like if they were asked, you know, what's your favorite subject, they didn't know how to answer or know how to even write about their favorite subject if they were to even know. Like they would have to have examples, couldn't really relate these ideas on their own without prompting. So I was wondering what could be done to make these outcomes better for students like that.
We had a class. I think you might be familiar with this, SB, but now I can't even remember what it was. But it was designed for kids with learning disabilities. There were a lot of ADHD kids in there, and there were a lot of dyslexia kids in there. And what it does is it takes one period out of the class day, and it devotes it to essentially just doing homework. So they would get like 3 or 4 college kids who were majoring in education that would come in, check into the school. And so you would have 3 or 4 college kids in the classroom with those kids. And it was designed for those learning disabilities, but honestly, anybody who was having problems like organizationally with school or who was falling behind would benefit from this class. And I can't remember what it was called, but it's in all the schools. And it was tremendous. I sometimes we had parents that would get involved in that class in the same way as the college kid. Any way we could get involved. We had the Big Brother, Big Sister program as well, which also made a difference sometimes, depending on the kid. Because the fact is they can't do homework. And while we know that homework is not the best way to teach kids, a lot of teachers still have homework as part of their curriculum. And as a result, you just really need to find a way to get that homework done in order for those kids to succeed. And the way
Yeah.
to do that is to have a class that's devoted to just doing your homework.
Yep. Like
Um,
homework
I,
itself.
I was amazed how much of a difference that made. Not just with grades, because with grade you can always pump up grades any kind of artificial way, but also with standardized test scores. The kids that would get their homework done on a regular basis because of that class also ended up with higher standardized test scores.
If I remember correctly, it was USCA that did a study on the effects of homework and learning within like a classroom, and they had a class that taught the subject like fully just teaching the subject with no homework, and then they taught the subject and had homework afterwards. And when they compared the scores on tests for the kids after the homework group and the not homework group, they didn't see a significant, like a statistical significantly different in test scores from the homework group and the not homework group.
Right. I'm
Interesting.
looking
So-
up right now. Yeah.
So like
You'll immediately recognize it as soon as I say it. I'm just trying to figure out.
yeah. The thing is that like homework itself, it may help in some aspects, but the lesson itself is actually the more important aspect of the class than the homework that is given.
Right.
So if your lesson is shit and then
Right.
the kids do poorly on the test, it's because you're a shit teacher, not because they didn't do homework.
Yeah. No, I agree. But we had a lot of shit teachers, and also, but also like
teachers.
we also had a lot of teachers that might have been good, but their curriculum is mandated by the district to include homework and other things like that, and so they couldn't be as good of a teacher as they might otherwise have been. But then also, this is why to this day, I'm coming around on it. Okay, but my distrust of unions has to do with the way unions are sometimes used to avoid accountability in the classroom.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very hard to fire a bad teacher. Very hard.
Yep. And it's not just the United States. Same thing here. I had a teacher that was absolutely horrible. But the only way to get teachers transferred from school to school is to get approval from the principals at the school to the receiving school of a particular teacher. So you can put a teacher out for transfer, but if the incoming school does not accept that teacher, the principal does not accept that teacher cannot be transferred. And that's just how like the system here works. So you'll get teachers that are utterly shit that should not be anywhere near a classroom that'll be at the same school for 12 years when they're usually on a 3 to 5 year cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, it is terrible. The guy was an absolute asshat, like a fucking asshat.
Yeah, there should be people in school. I mean, there are technically people that are, but really there aren't. Like we've got lots of people in the schools that can advocate for kids when it comes to mental health, or even when it comes to them like struggling in class to get them extra help or whatever. But there really needs to be more attention made towards kids who are having to deal with bad teachers. And there's not that kind of advocacy. The advocacy is all towards protecting bad teachers from consequences. I just don't know how, what to do to change that. But it's one of the reasons I distrust, teachers' unions. Now that I'm coming around on it a little bit because I understand that there are worse things in the world, right? And those worst things are what we're seeing right now. And so we also need unions to protect teachers from these bad policies. So like, I get it. Like they do good and they do bad. But I really wish there was a way we could just like focus on the good and not the bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. The way teachers work here with the unions and whatnot, technically they have a union, but the union has literally no teeth because public servants, can't quit their jobs in Japan. Like they're barred from quitting their jobs in Japan.
So what happens if you just don't show up? You go to jail?
Yeah, essentially yes. So the thing is like anybody that's working in public service here is not allowed to go on strike.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So like if you were trying to you could be jailed for going on strike for wages working as a teacher at a school. So if you're like, we're on strike and we're not teaching classes because the pay is too low or we don't have enough what is it, like PTO or whatnot, then you could go to jail for that. But if you're missing work, there's obviously protections like for like paid time off and like unpaid time off as well with that there. But if you are actively not going to work when the government's basically saying you need to go to work, then you can be jailed for that. So like as an example, during COVID, all teachers were required to be in the office, even though all the schools had no students in them. Everybody that was supposed to be like working that day as a public servant was required to be inside that school during that time.
So they were zooming from inside the classroom or something?
Yes. I spent an entire 8-hour day making sure everything like was technologically set up in classrooms so that teachers could Zoom in classrooms.
Okay.
So, but like everybody that was a public servant had to be at that school. I was there because I was working for the city at the time and I was in kind of a halfway public servant status at that time. So they just put me into the school, and it was kind of a good thing because like I some of the teachers, there was about 3 teachers that knew how to operate like technology at like a basic level, like a regular level. There was like 5 that could be taught, and then there was like 20 that I wouldn't trust to operate a pop-up toaster.
Jeez.
Yeah, we all know teachers like that for sure.
Yes.
So wondering with like, let's just say the courts managed to enforce this executive order being remanded, what reforms should be put in place to have a better system going forward? Like, what are the key things that need to be addressed in the Department of Education?
I mean, I think Despy suggested standardized testing, and I think that's probably a chief one, right? The ways in which, and the relationship, like what are the consequences of various different kinds of test scores, right? So making it so that the consequences hit the districts and even the teachers, but not the students, I think is job number one, right? I believe in standardized testing at all levels. I really do, because the more data you have, the better. But they shouldn't be high stakes. That's the problem.
Right.
And so, this started with No Child Left Behind, really. This started with at the very beginning of the Bush administration. This is a 25-year-old problem at this point. And we now know that, I mean, already if people are gaming the system so that different states have different standards, then already it's becoming, you're starting to lose the ability, whatever benefits that we got from standardized testing is starting to go away.
But we would be remiss if we didn't say that Obama fucked it up worse with the Every Student Succeed Act.
Yeah, sure. Right, because that's what makes standardized testing non-standardized.
Yes.
You have to be able to. Yeah,
I was hoping you would elaborate on that, Desperado.
Like George W. Bush took a hammer to how we do funding for schools and whatnot. It was Obama that decided to use the jackhammer. And the thing is that not only that is that with the way like standardized tests, like how they're curated, is all determined by the states at the same time. Obama gave more states' rights to the states as it pertains to education than George W. Bush did. So anybody who is an advocate for states' rights as it pertains to education should absolutely fucking love Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, they're a fucking hypocrite.
It's amazing how the talking points shift on this over time, because when Bush first took it over, it was essentially billed as a federal takeover of education, because he's basically saying that the standardized testing system that we have in Texas, we're going to take it to all 50 states. And so, again, if it weren't so high stakes, I would have been for it. And I'm still for it, except for the high stakes part of it. But yeah, anytime you can allow the states to differentiate in that way, it loses its value. Because what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to say that, I think, is it still Massachusetts that's number one in education?
Yes, I think
Uh,
so.
yeah, you
They
still
have
want
their
to be
own
able to
standardized
say,
test. They have their own standardized test as well too. Like just
well,
like
yeah,
Texas.
right, but theirs might be actually more stringent, not less. You know what I mean? But
Right.
what I'm saying is that if you have the same test in all 50 states, though, then you have a basis by which you can say that no, this is the state that we all need to be paying attention to. Or more than likely, like corporations, if they're saying, okay, we're going to put our headquarters here because we want to be able to hire out of this educational system because it's producing better potential workers or whatever, it creates an incentive for states to improve their education system. But then once that standardization goes out of it, then that sort of like eliminates
Yeah.
anyone's ability to make those comparisons.
Right.
It should be embarrassing to Mississippi that it's 50th in education, or whatever state is 50th. You know what I mean? It should be embarrassing for them. But if we're going to create a system that makes it so that it doesn't look like they're that far behind, then that's terrible for kids, right? But it's good for the Republicans running that state to be able to cover up their poor performance.
Yeah, I mean, if what is it? Colorado has what is it, like trigonometry questions in their high school exam, whereas like Mississippi has which crayon tastes the best as one of the questions on their test for the same high school level, like test. Like we're not going to see anything.
List the 10 Commandments in order here. If you can list all 10, that's an A.
But which Bible are we using?
Depends it depends on which test, right? Mississippi will do one version of it's really not the which Bible, it's which portion of Genesis you're talking about. But yeah.
Right.
Sure, there's 3 different kinds, 3 different orders.
Right.
For whatever the Louisiana order is, that's the correct one. Whichever one they're using.
We're judging by the lowest reading level in the country at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you imagine having a standardized test in, let's just say, North Carolina, that is teaching a lost cause section in their history section, and then you have somebody that's taking a test that's, let's just say, in New York on the exact same thing, but the answers are the exact opposite from each other, and both are considered correct.
Exactly. This is why I think, ironically, private institutions are, if anything's mitigating this, right, it's going to be the fact that the AP tests still exist and the SAT still exists and stuff like that. As much as we can rightfully complain that the SAT has its own problems, it's still way better than what this administration is likely to have for any kind of standards it has. To the point where you can see the steps happening in Florida. So Florida, for instance, didn't want to teach CRT, what they considered to be CRT, which is basically any race awareness at all. And okay, fine, you don't teach it anymore. But then there's these AP tests that, especially AP history, right? But also there's specific AP tests for, there's a Black History AP test, for instance. And so now they're starting to go after those and say, oh, even this test is biased, so we're going to throw it out, or we're not going to teach that AP course anymore, or something like this. Because they're starting to realize, okay, our test scores are going to go down, so we just won't take the test. That way, nobody knows that our education standards are slipping. And I think it's only a matter of time before a major state, and I guess all states are major states, it's only a matter of time before a state says, we're not doing AP history anymore.
Yeah. The other thing to take into account with this is, now that everything's shifting over to the states and it's not necessarily tied to the federal government anymore,
right,
you're going to have employers that are going to be looking at where you got your high school diploma.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you got a high school diploma in Mississippi, you might not be able to get a job. What is it like a forklift job for whatever? What is it like harbor you want to work for? Just because you got your high school diploma from Mississippi. Where before we had like with like the federal government overseeing all of this, it would be that you're basically getting a degree, like a high school degree that is mandated by the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're getting degrees that are that you're getting by individual states. So this can affect how people go to university. You could have somebody that was just like an absolutely stellar student, like somebody that should be able to get into a university super easy, that, let's just say, for example, lives in Mississippi. But the thing is that because they have that Mississippi diploma, MIT may not take them because of how these systems are being set up. Even though this person has the ability and are white, that have the ability to go to MIT and actually do phenomenal work, just because their education system is a piece of shit, they're not going to be able to get into that university because of that high school diploma. And I'll tell you, I see this right now because that's how it works here in Japan. Whatever high school you go to, whatever diploma you get at that high school will literally determine where you can go later on in life. And it's all based on like scores and tests and whatnot. So
here's another example of how the private sector is now less bad than the incoming public sector. There are some institutions that are sort of coming in for the rescue a little bit. Like, it's not that it's going to be able to make up for it entirely or anything close. But Harvard, for instance, is now offering free tuition to everyone whose family makes less than $200,000 a year. That's a new policy that they just did.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing: offering free tuition is great and all. That is absolutely fantastic. I fully applaud them for that. But then once you get the lab fees, once you get books, once you get all of these other fees that go along with taking like particular classes, which are designed to be profitable inside the university, they're still going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt anyway, even just taking the tuition off.
So I think what they said was that the policy would be so that you don't pay anything if you make less than 100,000. So I think probably those extra fees would apply between 100 and 200,000. Like, it's free tuition at up to 200,000, but underneath 100,000, I think they cover for it. But the bigger problem that still doesn't. There's still lots of problems, right? One of the problems is that you still got to be able to get in, and the fact is, getting into Harvard almost certainly requires a student have resources, because the GPA that's required, the test scores that are required, the extracurriculars that are required. Because listen, my whole job now is to make sure that the extracurricular side of that is filled up in a student's college application by the time they graduate high school or get close to graduation. And you're not going to hit all three of those things unless your family has resources, right? Like a poor kid. By and large, I mean, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but by and large, a poor kid, who has to work a job after school or something, isn't going to have the extracurriculars, especially. Maybe they'll have the GPA, because you can sort of game your GPA to where it could be high or whatever. I have students who are in my program specifically because, you'll appreciate this, Despy, I think, specifically because if they take a debate class in their public school, it doesn't count as an honors or an AP class. So you don't get the GPA boost, so you get an extra 5 points or 10. For an honors class, you get a 90 becomes a 95, right? Or a 95 becomes 100. And for an AP class, you get an extra 10 points. So a 90 becomes 100, that sort of thing. Or 100 becomes 110. And so you don't get that boost if you take debate there. So they don't take debate at their local high school. And then they just pay to come to my after school program instead and have me send them to tournaments instead of, and listen, I would much rather, I'd be happy for them to do both. But if they had to choose, personally, I think it's way better to go to your local high school and take the class there, where you can be part of a team and you can be sponsored by your school and all this other stuff. But because they don't want to give up that 5 to 10 point bonus, because it's not considered an honors or an AP class, then that's why they're coming to me instead of signing up for their local schools club. That's how competitive things have gotten now, to where taking one debate class can ruin your GPA for getting into a place like Harvard.
Yep.
I mean, it's sad. So what chance does a regular kid, with low income family have when like the people that are actually getting into these schools, like they're gaming it such that they can't even take the classes that they want to take because of that. They're just taking every single AP class they can. And then after that, every single honors class that they can. And then any other class that doesn't do that, they want to push off into summer school so they'll have more room to take more AP classes and stuff like that. Then they want to add more after school programs like speech and debate, but they want to off-source it to a private school on the side.
Yep.
Also that they can maximize their GPA.
Yep.
That's where we are today. So
and
if you're a normie kid whose parents aren't even aware of any of the stuff, what chance do you have of getting into a place like Harvard?
I mean, you could score 1,600 on the SAT and get into there, but you're also forgetting that when you go to university, you also have housing, food, all of these other amenities you have to pay for at the same time.
That's true
and
too,
if your family doesn't have that, especially around Harvard, all of the housing that's going to be directly around Harvard is going to be astronomically expensive just because of the type of people that are going to be going to Harvard at the same time.
But also these rich kids are going to prep schools where they start prepping for the SAT in 7th grade.
Yeah.
So
7 years old.
These kids are the ones that are going to snap up all those 1,600 scores, not the. You might have a genius kid who can get a 1,600 like naturally, but those numbers are going to be like the numbers of kids who can do that are going to be very low, because the number one way to increase your SAT score isn't to be a genius, it's to be prepped.
Yeah. Yep. But what I was just trying to say is that even if somebody did have the capacity to get into there, the things outside the university that you need to survive is going to cost more than anybody in their family is going to be able to give them.
No, I agree. Although I did spend a lot of time back when I was in the public schools, I did spend a lot of time making sure that any kid that did get into a good college was able to get those kind of resources too, you know, housing and all of that kind of stuff. And honestly, these days, the Ivy League schools really are prepared to bend over backwards to make sure that if you get into their school, they won't let money be the reason that you can't go. However, that's Ivy League schools. Like, what we need is for those resources to be available to state schools and a whole bunch of other kinds of schools, because Ivy League schools aren't going to be able to accept the number of kids to where they can move the needle in terms of what these kids have available to them. So it's great that Harvard's doing this, right? But I would like for the average American college to be able to do this.
Well, it's going to be a lot harder now that
It's
federal
going to be a lot
funding
harder.
for these public universities
Harvard can do it because they have an obscene endowment, right? And there are other schools that have these massive endowments who could maybe do it, and they're doing what they can to compensate for what's happening right now. But
the majority of their alumni are also old money at the same time. So I mean, like when you're looking at, like, I went to the University of Minnesota. If you go look at the alums at the University of Minnesota, yes, there's going to be a lot of like really, really rich people, but it's not, the people there are not necessarily people that have had like legacy for years and years and years and years of people that have gone to the University of Minnesota. Whereas when you're looking at like Harvard or Yale or like Stanford or whatnot, all of these universities are going to have people that have been gone there for generations. And it's going to be all old money.
Yeah, George W. Bush was a C student and somehow got into Harvard and Yale. It wasn't his grades that did it.
Right. It's old money.
Yep.
And that's pretty much going to be what it is going forward. If you aren't a legacy student, you're probably going to have a hard time in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it is true that the geniuses are going to be able to get in, right? Like the people that Despy's talking about that would naturally get a high score or something. But I'm not worried about the geniuses. I'm worried about the above average student who should be getting into a UPenn or University of Texas or someplace like that and can't go mainly because of money.
Yep. Yep.
What's the percentage now? The automatic admission to UT used to be the top 10% of graduating class guaranteed admission. And that drops every couple of years. That drops. I think it's like 5% now, something.
Mm-hmm.
But that number keeps dropping too, which means it's getting harder and harder. You know, I used to be able to tell my kids.
Tests aren't cutting it anymore, I guess.
I mean, if you start from freshman year and you really like put your mind to it, you can pretty much guarantee that you'll graduate in the top 10% of a public school in America. These days, and that would have gotten you into UT, guaranteed admission, before. But top 5%, that's a different story. Like I think it might even be top 4. I can't remember. But it's the number of people who can actually be guaranteed admission into University of Texas is going down, down, down. Because and more people are trying to game their GPAs anyway.
Yep.
All of my students are gaming their GPAs. All of them.
I mean, that's honestly a good way to go about things. I would like to see more kids with the ability to look toward going to college and gaming their GPAs and making sure they're able to get higher education. But that doesn't look like it's going to be the status quo going forward.
I mean, it costs money to quote unquote game your GPA.
Yeah.
So the thing is, like, there's no way to go and get private coaching lessons like this here without paying an exorbitant amount of money to get the coaching lessons you need to game your GPA. There's no way to do all this stuff without having money to begin with.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I used to give a PowerPoint to the kids because, you know, everyone takes the PSAT now. It's like it's required. So everyone junior year, they have to take the PSAT. It used to be that wasn't the case. And when the public school district started requiring that everyone take the PSAT, what it meant was that because if you're going to get commended or higher on the PSAT, you need to be in the top 4% of the people who take the test. So when they increased that that denominator by about 5-fold, because now every kid in America is taking the test, that meant that the number of people who could get in the top 4% increased 5-fold. And so, but it wasn't the kids from those public schools that were getting those scholarships, those commended designations. It was the kids. So it's now to the point that the local prep schools, like here in my area, about 80% of them get commended or higher on the PSAT. And in the public schools, it's less than 1%.
It would be like if we were to put this in like a sports analogy, this would be like somebody that's learning to play basketball, right? And they have their ball, and they can go down to the local park and shoot, but they're playing against somebody that has all the elite equipment, has the elite coaches, has all like a court and area to shoot inside their own home. And everything is right there at their fingertips, while the other person has to deal with like the hoop at the park that has its own problems and other people that are possibly using it at the same time. Which person is going to succeed in a basketball setting? There's going to be kids that are going to be just naturally good at basketball that are going to exceed above other people, but the people that have all of that stuff available to them in their own home right there are going to outperform the people that have to go down to the public park.
And think about it this way, like the scholarships that are given as a result of PSAT scores, which is generally sophomore to junior years when those are handed out. The kids that are snapping up those scholarships because they're going to those prep schools and 80% of them are getting commended or higher, they're snapping up scholarships that were meant for all of those public school kids, because the idea is your colleges are so full of people who just write these massive checks to go to college that in order for the average like non-rich kid to be able to compete with that, you've got to give out scholarships that can sort of equalize that. But then these rich kids are sending these rich families are sending their kids to these prep schools, and they're spending more than college tuition costs over the course of K through 12. You know, they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to get that prep. And in the process, they're snapping up all of these scholarships that were intended for the normie kids, which it makes no sense for them because they're spending a ton of money in order to take these dinky scholarships from the other kids. And colleges, in order to make business, it's just a business strategy, is that you jack up your tuition prices so that you can then give out scholarships to bring it back down to your normal price. And because those scholarships are going to the prep school kids who've gamed the system, what it means is that the poor kids are paying twice as much in tuition that they otherwise could in order to pay to subsidize the rich kids.
Yep. Hey, do you remember? You remember the movie How High, right?
Mm.
Remember when they're asking about where the financial aid office is? What the reply was? That wasn't a lie.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, that's about.
But it's amazing. So if the scholarship for your school should be $20,000, but it's $40,000 instead, the poor kids are paying that $40,000 by taking out loans so that the rich kids can get full ride scholarships.
Yep.
Like,
But
just think about
supposedly
that
the
for a minute.
system
That's
is
incredible.
designed so that
Yeah.
the poor kids could get in
Yeah.
and it could be subsidized by the rich kids.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep. Performance-based scholarships are subsidies for the rich. That's just what they are.
Well, I think that pretty much covers most of what we're going to be dealing with in the future. It's just about to get
Yeah.
a whole lot worse.
Worse.
mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead and raid out for the night. Thank you both for being here.
For
to
depressing you?
I
Yeah.
mean, more
You're
than
welcome.
I already was. No, I truly appreciate it. That's a lot of information to give to people to understand like what we're up against in the future as all these institutions are being dismantled by executive order. We're doing great. 2025
Yeah.
is batting what 65 70% average at this point.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well,
Yeah.
I will go ahead and raid out at this point. And thank you both for being here. Who to raid? Who to raid? Oh, we got Pisco. Let's raid Pisco. Yeah, thank you all for showing up. As always, Chad is the winner. We are here to entertain. And I am glad to see both of these wonderful faces on my screen today. I am overjoyed. The beard energy is out of control.
I need to shave mine here pretty soon, actually. So
Peace, y'all.